Welcome to the Leadership Expose podcast. This podcast is for purpose-driven leaders at diverse levels and organizations around the world who are seeking to scale and transform their leadership, to level up their business, and to create an impact on the lives of people all around them. Business and boardroom topics, trends, innovation, transformation, and the intersection with leadership is the focus. We enable success. I'm your host, Stephen Paul. In this episode, I'm excited to have Maggie Calle. Maggie serves currently as the Chief Information Security Officer at Varicent. For over 2 decades, she has held several leadership roles in the financial, insurance, and retail and technology sectors. She has successfully embedded tone at the top in management and oversight of cybersecurity and risk management programs, supporting business objectives, innovation, and digital transformation. She's a speaker and has been recognized as a leader and influencer by several publications, such as Canada's Top 20 Women in Cybersecurity. We'll discuss with Maggie about the important topics of information security and risk management, the evolution of cybersecurity teams and relationships of this within executives and the board. Maggie, welcome. How are you doing today?
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon over there.
It's a good start.
Thank you for having me here. I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a cold day today, but in Canada. I'm in Toronto, just north of Toronto, actually, Markham. So thank you for having me here today.
You know, Maggie, just before the podcast, we were just reminiscing on how we had partnered together, and for the purpose of our audience here, I mean, like we partnered over a decade ago back in Canada, and I've always valued your opinion. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today, Maggie. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you. Yeah, interestingly enough, when we worked together, I was thinking that I would get out of information security. And so I was giving a try to risk management and regulatory work, which funny enough ended up being another area of security where I specialize in. So yeah, I'm glad that our journeys are always, they're not straight.
Yeah.
They kind of go in different ways, sideways, and then eventually I made it back into security, as that clearly was my passion. But then I enhanced my skills in risk management in the information security space. So yeah, so that was interesting that when we worked together, it was capital markets, risk management, and counterparty risk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember those days, capital markets risk, enterprise risk. So I'm just curious, just building on the journey that you just started. Tell us a little bit about you personally and your professional journey, some of that intersection and where you're at currently.
Yeah, so I guess nowadays you probably hear a lot of people talking about how do you get into security. It's such a hot field. And yeah, like I actually ended up in security by a complete accident. When I was finishing up, I was actually in the second year of a 3-year program at Seneca College, and I was doing computer programming and analysis. So a programmer, right? And I had like hard skills, like this was in the late 90s, Java, C++, web development, which was the internet bubble in the late 90s. And so I just started looking for jobs. A lot of my friends were doing co-op programs. I was not doing the co-op program. And when I started looking for jobs, like people just like reached back to me. And then I was wondering, why like it was just so quick that people will reach back and then ask for like interviews. And I was like, well, I'm not finished yet with my program. Like I'm in second year.
Yeah.
But I'll come over for an interview. And so I went for this interview. It was about programming, and it was PKI, public key infrastructure. Like I
Yeah.
had to,
Yeah.
there was not Google at the time, or maybe Google wasn't big enough, but I went, I think it was AOL search that I went in and I checked, and it was, it's like encryption programming, just doing encryption programming and so on. And I went there, I got the job, and I just really had no clue what public key infrastructure was, but they loved my skills because it was all about internet. It was a small startup company. And that's kind of how I ended up with my first job in a very small company of like about under 30 people. And it was like really, really, the focus was certificates, encryption, biometrics, and like everything to do with encryption. It's like I did 1 year there before I actually moved into the banking industry, but it was like so much work. Like we were like a startup company, people like sleep in the office.
In the office.
I wasn't sleeping in the office, but I was getting a ride home like at midnight and so on. And but it was really interesting work, like certificate management, everything to do with how we secure our websites, right? Our internet-facing properties and digital properties, which is now is the basics, but back then it was like that was the key security aspects of implementing a web application where people can go and do online banking and things like that. So it was really amazing experience. And that's kind of what launched my career into security. And like I said, I had to Google what PKI and public key infrastructure was, and interesting start.
And the rest.
The rest is history. The rest is history. I work at many banks, Banco Montreal. I worked for 16 years, CIBC, Scotiabank. All of the jobs were in doing, in my initial 8 years in the financial industry was programming, working with any cryptographic components that were needed to secure our internet facing and web applications and apps as we know them today, right? Everyone has an app on their phone now. But back then, it was like a huge accomplishment if you can do email money transfer, which was one of the features that I personally work on. And the very first feature in our application at Banco Montreal, where people were now able to do email money transfer. And so all of those features, right, paying bills, like they were all brand new. Like it's just amazing the evolution that we had, where people of this generation or my kids, for example, will be like, what? You couldn't pay things online? 2020, I'm talking about like 1999, 2020. And yes, it wasn't a common feature. And when the feature came on, and how to email money transfer, how to view all your bills electronically, your statements, that was a big accomplishment from a development perspective. But and then I moved on into after my development work and doing all of that encryption and online banking features and so on, I moved into the security team, working in operations, doing disaster recovery, business continuity management, which are huge, right? Like, that became a focus as a result of 9/11 and 2021. All regulators obviously wanted to have a focus on how disaster recovery is done by organizations, right? Like, the backup sites were destroyed, and primary and backup sites were destroyed during the 9/11 events. So that was a huge focus for me, during that time of 2005 to like 2008, building resilient applications and resiliency in our data centers. And then we moved to the cloud era, right? It was first the data centers, and then cloud, and I work in identity and access management, and obviously I did a little stint in capital markets when I work with you. but then application security, vulnerability management, risk management. And so, yeah, it's that's been my career over the years and over the different financial institutions. I did try retail as well. I work a little bit at Canadian Tire, but then I moved, now I'm in a software company, and it's just really amazing. I love the culture, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, as you mentioned, which gives me very good opportunities to work with the business and really help with the growth of the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more, I guess, through the discussions, but the evolution, not just technologically, but the roles of the organization, of the security organization, has changed dramatically, as I have seen over the past 23 years, where, the roles, I think, were pretty technical, and security didn't really get as involved with the business, but it's just such a big difference in the evolution that I've seen that we can dive in later on. And
absolutely, Maggie. I mean, like, as you were just describing it, a lot of takeaways here. I mean, like you mentioned about some of your pivotal moments with different sectors, but also within the evolution of, risk and security application. And it's interesting, as you were talking about payments processing, or, secure payments processing. I mean, like some countries are a lot more mature in that aspect, but it's good. It was just good to hear that you're part of those pioneering teams to actually help build that, which then comes to, evolution of change. We're going through a lot of change these days, and which means security becomes such an important topic. There's a lot of transformation, business digital transformation within companies, and you're in an organization that's technology oriented at this point. But in your view, taking into consideration the domain of security, what kind of problems do you, in your view, what do you face in managing security risk that not only looks at the technological aspect, but actually managing the business aspects as well, and considering all these changes that are happening at 100 miles an hour?
So I think from managing a security team nowadays really requires more than technical skills, right? And whereas before, like I just remember, from like, as long as if you're in a security team and your tech stuff and you're doing that, but you're doing it like kind of sort of in a back room, right? Like you're not really facing with the business, and where that's like the huge difference nowadays, where you have to, as a security team, you can be fully isolated and like, lurking in the background and doing things on your own. You have to understand the business objectives. And that's kind of how I think nowadays that a security CISO or a head of, they can make the difference, right? Because we have to be there to support the business, to support the business growth, to support the business objectives, to support innovation. You mentioned about digital transformation, right? In actual fact, right, the small organizations, the startup companies, they know how to do that very well. They work together. They're small enough that there is no silos. Everything is automated. Security is embedded into the pipelines for delivery, right? The delivery pipelines, the product build, the product design, design thinking, and all of that. Like, it's the small organizations are actually doing it right. And SMBs and so on. And what's happened is that, and I've worked in very gigantic organizations, right? Like, 50,000 employees, 100,000 employees, that's those large organizations, although they may be mature in security, but there's a friction, right? Security is working as a silo, and the business has their objectives, and there is friction. Not everything is automated. There is no embedding of security, and that's why those organizations have taken upon themselves to go through major business transformations where they are trying to basically act as a startup company.
Yeah.
Because the startup company does not have silos.
Yeah.
Right? They're all working towards the same thing. They're all working, the embedded, all the resources are working. There is no security team, and there is no like business and it's them and us. It's about all of us together doing what's best and removing any frictions and trying to, and the security teams have to work really hard to understand the product inside out, right? It's all about product. It's not about projects as well. Whereas the big organizations and we work in one of them together, it was a big project, right? And then you operationalize it, and then the project is done. Versus SMBs, they have products, and that's their bread and butter. And the entire organization, whether they're in security, in marketing, customer success, they're all trying to figure out what are the best features in terms of security, what are the best features in terms of customer features, and how they can help growth together the products, right? And so coming from big organizations where I went through all of those different digital transformations, and where we started to try and embed security and into all the processes, it's so different when I come into a small organization and it's like, oh, we're just trying to be like a startup company in the big organizations. Right. And so that's like kind of like the huge difference that I see, and how a leader in security, whether they're in a large enough enterprise or an SMB, as a business leader, I think it's extremely important that I understand exactly what we're offering to the end user on the street, to the end customer, and how I can make my contribution to it. Right? It's from a security perspective.
It's as you were describing it, from a CISO perspective, you're basically connecting your back office, your middle office, and your front office, but also looking at what your consumers want, and in alignment with your growth strategy. But I also view you as one of the champions of security within the executive and the board as well, to bring some of these topics to light so that you can bring that cohesion across the different teams. Is that a fair? Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. Like the business stakeholder is one thing, and obviously the back office and my peers and the technology peers, but the board, I think, and I have been actually doing some training, board training. I'm in the part of the Directors College program, which is run here by McMaster University. There's others, like U of T runs it. So I'm in the last training course will be coming up actually in December. And I've learned so much, right? Because when I was presenting to the board and many organizations, it's kind of like you're trying to like not sound any alarms, and you're trying to be like very, you don't want to be scary in your presentation to them, and that things are under control. But when I'm taking the training for the board of directors, they're actually looking for transparency in the reporting that's done to them, right? And the board of directors are interested. They have a fiduciary duty and also a liability should they not do the right thing for when risks are disclosed to them, and they happen not to address those risks within the appetite of the risk appetite of the organization, or if there are legal risks and so on. If they don't address those risks, potentially, there is a legal liability. That's why all of the board of directors have insurance.
Yeah.
Right? They have to protect themselves personally from liabilities, because their decisions could come back to later to them in a litigation if they don't help the organization to do to make the right decisions. And so it's in their best interest for them to receive information that is transparent, clear, and well articulated as to what the true risk is. In this case, I'm talking about cyber risk. It's in the best interest of the management to present the risk transparently to and inform the board about the cybersecurity risks, right? Because in the end, the board of directors are the ones who do the approval of the budgets. And cybersecurity is an organization who typically gets deprioritized within a big organization when it comes to getting funding to advance and mature the security programs. So I think the leaders before, the security leaders, as they didn't want to create stress at the board or potential red flags, I think maybe the reporting wasn't as transparent as it should be, and therefore they've done a disservice to themselves because then they don't get the budget that is required for them to actually advance and mature the security program. So it's actually in our best interest as the CISO or the head of security to be transparent with the board, right, as to the actual cyber risks that we have, the gaps that potentially the weak controls that we may have in the organization. And for that, there's a lot of work required, right? Because you can't just come up to a conversation or a presentation to the board of directors without any information. And that's where also there is a lot of due diligence that needs to be done by a CISO, where or the head and the security team, where they need to be able to have conducted enough due diligence so that when we show up in front of the board, we have evidence that why are we saying that this is not mature enough, and so on. And there is so many frameworks. But then again, when you're talking about risk, you have to be able to articulate risk, right? So as a CISO, I had to learn to understand and how do I speak risk to like executives, to the board of directors, because everything can get lost in translation if they're not understanding. And like I said, that's the evolution that I've seen over where some of the cybersecurity information and daily stuff is quite operational. And it can get very confusing, and it's very technical, and there's a lot of jargon. And if you have a CISO that comes into the board, they're not going to be understood, right? So it has to be a CISO, I think, in my experience, has to have the ability to present, to speak risk in a way that is not confusing, non-technical jargon, and that can get the attention of the board members. Because if you do that, then you can get the appropriate funding for the maturing of the program, right? And security is a never-ending job, right? It's not like, oh, okay, we're going to mature it from 1 to 3 and we're done and we can pack our bags and go home. It's, so much sophistication, new threats, new attacks that then we need to keep evolving and keep refreshing the program, right? So to keep up with the different changes that happen on a daily basis. But that ability is extremely important to be someone who can understand how to speak to the cyber risk to the business and how to market the program to the C-level and also to the board of directors.
It's such an important aspect because you mentioned about funding and budgeting and so forth, which is all very good. And with the evolution of change as well, with when we look at cybersecurity, for example, and many companies sometimes are very just oblivious. If you even look at the board, for example, they don't really think of that as as something that might really impact them and the decisions that they need to make when there is a crisis, for example. I remember when I was, it was actually last year in one of the boards that I was in, there was actually a cyber threat. And it became into a crisis, and we had to invoke cyber security measures from the board level. And interestingly, this company did not have processes in place, did not have frameworks in place, but there were some individuals who knew how to deal with it. So it was in crisis management at that point. But what I'm trying to describe here is just echo what you mentioned. It's such an important aspect when the CISO comes in and speaks to the board and to the executive committee on the role of cybersecurity or security as a whole, and what is needed and why it's needed, why it's needed, and why the board needs to be taking that into consideration at a high level as an agenda item. So very much in line with what you just described, and many companies just don't do that. It's very appalling. So it's very good that you're actually doing the program that actually describes the need for directors to be held accountable to this. Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned one of the things, right? Like I think there is lack of like when you look at the board composition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the board composition has always focused on like finance, right?
Exactly.
Like somebody who knows the P&L. But this is such a big risk it's one of the trending risks, right? The top risk for organizations, that the board composition needs to be where there is somebody knowledgeable in the board that is a cyber expert, but also the rest of people in the board members need to have education.
Yeah.
Right, at least like ongoing education about the latest cyber threats. And most boards will meet on a quarterly basis. Yeah. So it's really one of the things that from my perspective, right, especially working in big organizations where like I was able to create material that can be presented to the board, whether it was me or my boss, who was the chief security officer, or the CISO at the time when I was reporting into a CISO, to be able to create awareness about the latest trends, about the latest. At least it's a topic of discussion, right? Yeah. It's like a standing item in the agenda, where it kind of brings some thought, and the board members can actually ask questions and educate themselves, and perhaps go and Google it after, if they didn't understand something, or ask questions. Are we also, at the risk of this threat, for example? And so they can ask, smarter questions as they keep getting more educational material, right? And not to mention, like, key risk indicators and metrics that are, cyber related should always be on the board agenda. But I think there is a lot of room for growth. Yeah. One of the reasons I'm pursuing this certificate for a charter director, because I think there is a lack of board members that have the training, and it's just the same as at all levels of security, right? In the ranks, entry level, mid level, there is just simply a gap of cybersecurity skill talent. Yeah. And like I was saying, right, it's not just at the board level, but all across the different ranks of security teams, right? So I think it's important to, as a security leader, to make sure that they're well informed, and there is educational material always presented to them, so they can keep understanding what the risk is about, and how they can deal with it.
Yeah, Maggie, you highlighted quite a few things in terms of building that awareness and the skills and so forth. And you're a leader in your own right, Maggie. So is anything, and you've touched on this, but is anything that you want to highlight in terms of a leadership lesson that you've learned or exhibited, which has transformed the way you lead or operate currently? Anything that you want to kind of share briefly?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons, really, right, having seen the transformation and the evolution of all of my roles, specifically security roles in the industry, the biggest lesson learned is that like we need to work together with the business and understand their objectives, understand what we sell, right? If we don't, even if we're security leaders, but we don't understand what we are selling, then it's really hard for us to be able to accommodate the security and make it less frictionless, right? Because no question about it, security creates friction, right? And we need to be able to balance that. So that's one of the biggest lessons that once I started understanding that and how I can be a business enabler, I think I was able to, in my career, to have more appreciation for the role that my team does, right? Like the business will now bring me into their town hall meeting, and it's like, oh, where's the security person presenting in the business town hall? And it's because they start to have that appreciation, right? So that's kind of one of the biggest lessons that it doesn't matter how much, and sometimes that's a focus. Unfortunately, it's something that I think, culturally speaking, the security teams have been kind of it's been ingrained into our mentalities that you have to be like super efficient, super knowledgeable, technically like competent, and all of that is true, right? Like you need competency in the technical aspects, but you also need competency in relationship management, building relationships and good rapport with the business, because if the business doesn't see us, security, as enablers, and we are blockers to them and the growth of the business, then that's just the biggest lesson. Like security is not going to get the funding, security is not going to get the props when we do something good. And that's just one of the biggest lessons. We cannot I cannot stress enough how important it is to be a very good partner to the business, to be able to survive and have your team be appreciated for the work that we do, because we do work hard. It's just that if it's not seen by anybody, then nobody's going to appreciate it, right?
And again, Maggie, you've touched on this one, but what advice do you have for people who want to either pivot to a career in cybersecurity, or maybe even to get into cybersecurity?
There is a lot of opportunities to get into cyber roles. There is so many people and postings and openings that are vacant. There's some issues that I've seen in terms of the match, because there is such a diverse field. It's not just about technical. We now need like people that are from marketing to come in and do training, security training. I was talking about earlier about decks that I created myself for the board of directors. Well, it would be nice if I can just have a communications person do that, and I can just give the technical aspects and they can prettify a deck for the board, right? And so there is such a diversified field that we often have so many roles open and vacant, so many people looking for a job, and an inability to match them up with the right roles, right? So my advice to people would be, and I believe still the HR practices are not quite up with the speed of how things have changed, the different skill sets that are required, right? Like, I mean, if you're looking for an accountant, you know exactly what the accountant should have, right? Like they should be like a finance person, and and have some CPA, CMA certifications, and
Yeah.
there is like a million of certifications in security as well. Some are for one specific area of expertise, others are. So I think, I truly believe that, when we're working with our HR partners, there's so much to know about it that they can't grasp all of it yet, right? To the extent that I had to sometimes say, okay, don't filter anybody out, just send me the resumes, right? Because like, I don't want the good candidates to filter out, because it's just such a diverse set of skill sets that we may be looking for. And that when I'm looking at the resumes, I might see, oh, here's the this person is not good for this role, but oh wow, this is amazing for that other role.
True.
But from an HR perspective, they couldn't know that, right? Like, it's just it's not fair for us to expect them to know that, right? Unless they have a long tenure of just filling roles in security, which we've started to do nowadays, right? Because we need actually specialized HR people for security recruiting, right? And so my advice to people would be like, just don't rely on submitting a resume into a machine that might disqualify them for like some keywords, right? And network, and network. Because that is one of the main ways how I myself have found different jobs, right? And just go to conferences, networking events. There's so many that happen online. They're free, many of them, and network and on LinkedIn, and just have the opportunity to have kind of like a direct discussion with the person, with the hiring manager, right? Because they can see the value of, you mentioned pivoting from one thing that maybe is IT into security, versus I think sometimes like the tools that the candidates submit their application to is just pre-scanning for specific words, and it's just basically filters out a good candidate that otherwise could be an excellent person. I've hired so many people directly from from campus, from job boards at the universities or colleges, where it's just much better to do the match. You do need a little bit extra time on both sides, on the candidate side and as well on the hiring person, because let's face it, if you're so busy and you think like the HR partner will filter 10 of the best candidates out of 200 submissions, you are going to want to rely on them, right? But if you see that the 20 filtered candidates are actually not very good, then I just want to see the big pool. Are those 200 and then that's kind of where I've seen these situations happen, where the filter candidates, the shortlisted ones, came to me, and I was like, oh, no, this is not the ones that we're looking for. Can I see the bigger pool of candidates? And then I'll kind of end up doing the job myself of where that's more work for the hiring manager, right? But do I want to have a role posted for a year when there is so much work? And it sometimes requires me to do that extra work so that I can fill a seat, right? And that's unfortunately those are the issues that I'm seeing. And the advice to people that might be frustrated out there with applying for so many jobs, and many of them now have university degrees that are security related degrees, and they're having trouble finding jobs, and it's because of these issues that we're still having to be able to cater with specialized knowledge, perhaps HR specialized knowledge into cybersecurity, and there's just so many postings that go unfilled for months, if not years, right? And that's unfortunately an issue.
It's good that you recognize that issue, but it's also great to hear how progressive minded you are to actually even reach out to some of these candidates and make the effort yourself to or even people, qualified people or people who are willing to come in and try out, but to support in that process of selecting and talent acquisition and bringing in the right people into the whole mix and helping them grow. So it's really great to hear. And speaking of we're all busy professionals, keen to hear about you, Maggie. What does a day in the life of Maggie look like, morning to evening?
Very busy. Fortunately, in my current company, I don't have too many. I don't have meeting fatigue.
Yeah.
Because we meet with purpose. It's an amazing culture, and we have short weeks as well. And but yeah, when I was in the major FIs, I was meeting like from 8 o'clock, if not earlier, 7 a.m. to like 6 p.m. back to back, with no rest even at lunchtime. And those situations, they tend to be like that. The bigger the organization is, and if you're remote only, then the only time you can catch somebody is really by putting a meeting calendar there.
Yeah.
And so we try to get away from those practices. In my organization, where so I get my day, right? Just to summarize, it's just take a few meetings during the day. I do have quiet time to do work, checking with my operations staff, any there is monitoring and so on that happens. So my team is always on it, and there is events that need to be looked up and investigated, and yeah, that's really, it's pretty much the same across all organizations. When I was in risk management, it's really about responding to client questionnaires, tons of questionnaires and questions about the maturity of your controls. Leading projects as well. We still have projects, right? Because we're always updating things or implementing new things or improving something. So yeah, essentially that's kind of what a day goes by. And I guess I'm not too when it's like a financial institution, if you might remember, we're always meeting with regulators. So that decreases if the organization is not very regulated.
Sure.
Right. So like obviously the financial institutions are highly regulated, so I will meet with at least 4 different regulators in a month, right? And you have a lot of preparation for those. But if it's a non-financial, not federally regulated, then you don't have a lot of meetings with regulators, but you still obviously have to manage to comply to regulations and so on. But yeah, so that's kind of what it looks like. So a lot of operational work, a lot of compliance, regulatory, helping respond to clients and customer questions. But yeah, which is something that has changed absolutely over the years, where more organizations are doing their due diligence. And so before they do business with you, you're basically asking all sorts of questions so you can conduct your due diligence and risk assessments, and that essentially you're trying to prevent your like I do a lot of work, right? Any vendors that we do a lot of risk assessments to understand their security posture and whether we actually do they have any risk? Do we want to do business with them? And it's really to manage third-party supplier risk. So a lot of work on risk assessments, right, as well. So
Wonderful. Maggie, we're coming to a close. Any closing messages you want to share? Very brief, or number one tip that you want to give to business owners or businesses, very briefly?
Yeah, I guess well, since I'm in security, obviously, the one tip would be that to manage cyber risk, right? Try to do your best as whether you're a small business or a medium size or a large organization. Cyber risk is the top number one risk for all organizations, with so many threats facing the increase over the pandemic. They haven't really gone away. That seems to now be the new norm. very sophisticated threats. And so do your best to have an understanding of what your security posture is. If it's a business owner, especially a small business owner, I think any cyber crisis event could essentially wipe the business. So it's extremely important to be diligent about managing cybersecurity risk in the best possible way.
Okay, wonderful, Maggie. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your insights. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your invitation, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maggie. Okay, folks, thank you very much for listening in, and stay tuned for our next episode where we hear from the executive of a Fortune 100 company and how they are creating a new business. So stay tuned for our next episode on this, and speak soon. Hey, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You're now seeing this part of the video also because you consume some of my content, insights, and teachings. Maybe you've been to my LinkedIn page or website or seen other social media ads or listened to my podcast. I'm Stephen Paul, a business and transformational executive coach, strategic advisor, leader, and board member. I've been in diverse roles, corporate executive, entrepreneur, and worked with businesses and firms of all sizes, built and launched businesses, created high-impact boards, and so forth in 4 continents. I get it. I've been there, done that, but what is different is I bring a unique perspective and a playbook. I've helped 100+ business leaders just like you to scale and align their leadership top teams, the board, and overall business for growth. Leaders like Ivana from medium-sized company in the EU who grew 150% and expanded globally in under 5 months. After she started to work with me over facilitated sessions in an initial 3 days, I helped fine-tune their strategy and align their leadership team and board to be a cohesive driving force to achieve their dreams and outcomes. I want to teach you the same thing and more on how to scale and align your leadership team and board so you can increase your business growth and value. Get clarity on what is the next right strategy for you. There are multiple ways we can work with you. Number 1, click the link for a free, non-obligatory 60-minute initial strategic session. Let's get a feel for your dreams, your vision, your challenges, and let me convert that into a route map for you where we can co-develop and co-pilot. Number 2, enroll in an innovative and intuitive digital online course that I have created to help you transform. It's called Unshakable Resilience. It is the ultimate program for individuals and business leaders like you who want to be equipped at a personal and professional level to respond to any form of challenges or in crisis situations and take on opportunities with grit, resilience, and build a mindset of success. In essence, you want to be unshakable, thrive in crisis, take on opportunities in the face of adversity, and build a success mindset. So, click the link below to learn more on how I can personally help you individually and your firm to scale and align your leadership team and business and pivot in a transformational way. And for you to experience this, whatever the challenge you're facing, get in touch with me. Let's discuss, and I will share my insight rapidly to enable your transformation. Click the links below.